What would you do if you found a dying baby in your workplace? You would save it. Of course you would save it. Now what if that baby was not human? What if it was something the world does not believe exists? What if saving it meant hiding it for years? What if it grew to 7 feet tall and you could no longer hide it? What if releasing it meant it would die because it never learned to survive in the wild? These are not hypothetical questions for me. These are the questions I have been living with since November 2016, when I found a Bigfoot infant freezing to death in my cargo hold at -44 degrees Fahrenheit. I saved it, I raised it, and now, 8 years later, I have to decide what comes next. Because the juvenile Bigfoot living in my hangar is getting too big, too strong, and too smart to stay hidden anymore. My name is Reid. I am 52 years old. I have been a bush pilot in Alaska for 28 years. I fly cargo, supplies to mining camps, emergency evacuations, mail delivery to villages that roads cannot reach. It is honest work, dangerous sometimes, especially in winter, but honest. I am not a scientist. I am not a cryptozoologist. I am not someone who goes looking for Bigfoot in the wilderness with thermal cameras and audio equipment. Before November 2016, I thought Bigfoot was a myth. Campfire stories. Entertainment for tourists who wanted to believe in something mysterious. Then I found one dying in my plane, and everything I thought I knew about the world turned out to be wrong. November 7th, 2016. That was the night that changed everything. I had just completed a routine supply run to a mining operation about 200 miles north of Fairbanks. Gold mine, small crew, 12 men working a remote claim. They needed food, fuel, and equipment. Standard delivery. I had done that route maybe 50 times before. Nothing unusual. The flight up was smooth. Clear skies. Temperature was -41 degrees Fahrenheit at ground level. Colder at altitude. I landed on a frozen lake near the camp, unloaded everything, shared a cup of coffee with the foreman, and took off around 9:30 p.m. The return flight was just as smooth. No weather. No mechanical issues, just me and an empty cargo hold flying south toward home. I landed back at my private hangar outside Fairbanks at 11:35 p.m. I was tired, cold, ready to lock up and go home. I did my standard post-flight checklist, shut down the engine, secured the controls, checked fuel levels for the next day. Everything normal, everything routine. Then I did my final walk-around inspection before locking the hangar door. That is when I heard it. Breathing, rapid, shallow, coming from inside the cargo hold. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Cargo holds are supposed to be empty after you unload. But the sound was there. Definite, real. Not wind, not metal. Contracting in the cold. Breathing. The breathing of something small and terrified. I opened the cargo hatch and shined my flashlight inside. And I saw it. Huddled in the corner behind the cargo net was an infant, covered in reddish-brown fur. Maybe 3 months old based on its size. 12 pounds if I had to guess. It had hands like a human baby, but larger, with tiny fingers that were gripping the cargo net. The face was not quite human, and not quite ape, somewhere in between. And its eyes. Those eyes were looking at me with an intelligence that made my chest tighten. It was dying. I could see that immediately. Hypothermia. The cargo hold is not heated. At -44 degrees Fahrenheit, nothing survives back there for long. The infant was shivering violently. Its breathing was shallow. Its lips, if you could call them lips, were blue. I had 2 choices in that moment. Leave it there and pretend I never saw it. Let nature take its course, or take it inside and try to save it. One choice meant I could walk away and forget this ever happened. The other choice meant hiding the biggest secret in Alaska. I reached in and picked it up. The infant was freezing. Its body temperature was dangerously low. I could feel how cold it was, even through my gloves. It made a sound when I lifted it. Not a cry exactly. Something else. A whimper. A plea. The sound something makes when it knows it is dying. I carried it inside the hangar and laid it on a pile of old blankets near the space heater. I turned the heater to maximum. I covered the infant with more blankets. and I watched it shiver for 20 minutes straight while I tried to figure out what I had just done. Those do not exist wild in Alaska. This was something else. Something I had heard about in stories, but never believed was real. This was a Bigfoot infant, a baby Bigfoot, and I had just brought it into my hangar instead of leaving it to die. The infant's breathing stabilized. Color started returning to its extremities. It was going to survive, at least for now. But that created a new problem. What do you do with a Bigfoot infant once you save it? I could not call the police or Fish and Wildlife. What would I even say? I found a Bigfoot baby in my cargo hold. They would think I was drunk or insane. And if they did believe me, they would take it away, lock it up somewhere, study it, treat it like a specimen instead of a living being. I needed help, medical help, someone who understood animal care, but who I could trust to keep a secret that would change the world if it got out. I had exactly one person who fit that description. Dr. Sarah Chen, veterinarian, exotic animal specialist, high school friend, someone who owed me nothing, but who I hoped would help anyway. I called her at midnight, told her I had an emergency, an injured animal that needed immediate care. I did not tell her what kind of animal. Not over the phone. She must have heard something in my voice because she agreed to come immediately, despite the hour and the cold. She arrived 40 minutes later with her medical bag. When she walked into the hangar and saw the infant wrapped in blankets by the heater, she stopped moving, just stood there staring. I watched her process what she was seeing, watched her brain try to categorize something that should not exist, watched her training as a veterinarian collide with her understanding of reality. Then she walked over slowly, knelt down, and began examining the infant with the clinical detachment of a professional. She checked its temperature, its breathing, its pulse. She looked at its hands, its feet, its face. She spent 5 minutes in complete silence just gathering information. When she finally looked up at me, I could see the conflict in her eyes. The scientist in her wanted to document everything, call colleagues, publish findings. The friend in her understood why I had called her instead of authorities. And the veterinarian in her knew this infant needed immediate care, regardless of what it was, or what that meant for the world. She made her decision without saying it out loud. She started treating the infant, warming protocols for hypothermia, hydration assessment, nutritional planning. She worked for 2 hours while I watched and learned. And when she finally left at 3 o'clock in the morning, I understood the unspoken agreement we had just made. She would help me keep this infant alive, and I would keep her involvement secret. That was the moment I became responsible for a Bigfoot. Not temporarily. Not until I figured out what to do, but permanently. Because Sarah had explained something critical during her examination. Bigfoot infants, assuming they developed like other primates, would need parental care for years. Maybe a decade or longer. This infant had no parents, no family that I could find or return it to. And releasing it alone into the wilderness would be a death sentence. I had saved its life, and in doing so, I had inherited responsibility for that life until it could survive on its own, which meant years, possibly many years, of hiding, of lying, of keeping the biggest secret in Alaska locked inside my hangar. That first night, I sat beside the sleeping infant and tried to process what I had done. I tried to imagine the next week, the next month, the next year. I tried to imagine feeding it, caring for it, watching it grow. I tried to imagine keeping it hidden from neighbors, from friends, from authorities who would take it away the moment they knew it existed. I could not imagine any of it. It seemed impossible. But the infant was real. Its breathing was real. The warmth returning to its body was real. And my responsibility for it was real, whether I could imagine the future or not. I decided to give it 24 hours. One day to stabilize. One day to figure out feeding. One day to make sure it would survive. Then I would decide what to do next. But 24 hours turned into 48. Then 72. Then a week. Then a month. And before I realized what was happening, I was 6 months into raising a Bigfoot infant that was growing faster than I had imagined possible. But I will tell you about that growth later. about how it went from 12 pounds to 45 pounds in 1 year, about how it learned to walk at 6 months and climb at 8, about how it started making vocalizations that sounded almost like language, about how it bonded to me in ways I did not expect and probably should not have allowed. Right now, I need you to understand the decision I made that night, because everything that came after, every lie I told, every risk I took, every close call I survived, all of it traces back to November 7th, 2016, when I found the dying Bigfoot infant at -44 degrees Fahrenheit and chose to save it instead of walking away. That infant is not an infant anymore. It is 8 years old, 7 feet 7 inches tall, 340 pounds, strong enough to bend steel, smart enough to understand English, and dependent enough on me that releasing it into the wild would kill it within weeks. I named it Momo. The reasons for that name will make sense later when I explain how it used to follow me around the hangar like a shadow, how it would watch me do pre-flight checks and try to mimic my movements, how it seemed fascinated by aircraft in ways that no animal should be. But right now, in November 2024, exactly 8 years after I found Momo freezing in my cargo hold, I am out of time. The hangar lease is up for renewal. The landlord wants an insurance inspection. I have 72 hours to figure out what to do with a juvenile Bigfoot that cannot survive in the wild but cannot stay hidden anymore. I was raising something far more intelligent and far more complicated than I had ever prepared for. The first challenge was food. Bigfoot infants do not come with instruction manuals. There is no parenting book titled How to Raise a Cryptid in your hangar. I had to figure out everything through trial and error. And error meant watching the infant refuse food, spit out food, or worse, get sick from food that its system could not process. Sarah Chen became my lifeline during those early weeks. She visited every 3 days, sometimes more often when problems arose. She brought medical equipment, nutritional supplements, and most importantly, knowledge about primate development that I could adapt for a species that officially did not exist. The infant could not digest cow's milk. We tried that first, and it resulted in severe digestive distress that lasted for hours. Sarah theorized that Bigfoot physiology was closer to great apes than to humans, which meant plant-based nutrition with occasional protein. We started with a custom formula she mixed herself: oat milk base, mashed fruits, ground nuts, protein powder from plant sources. The infant accepted it immediately. Feeding happened every 4 hours for the first month. I set alarms, woke up at 2 o'clock. My entire life became scheduled around a Bigfoot infant's nutritional needs. I stopped taking flying jobs that required overnight stays. I turned down contracts that would keep me away from the hangar more than 6 hours. My income dropped by 40% in the first 2 months, but the infant was thriving. Within 2 weeks, its body temperature had fully stabilized. The shivering stopped. Color returned to its skin beneath the fur. Its eyes became brighter, more alert, more focused, and it started making sounds. Not crying, not exactly, but vocalizations that seemed intentional. Different sounds for different needs. One sound for hunger, another for discomfort, another that I swear meant it wanted attention. By week 3, it had doubled in size, 24 pounds, growing faster than any primate Sarah had ever documented. She took measurements every visit, recorded everything in encrypted files she kept on a secure drive, and constantly adjusted the feeding formula to account for the accelerated growth rate. By week 6, the infant was crawling. Not the awkward baby crawl of human infants. Coordinated movement with purpose. It would crawl across the blankets toward the heater when it was cold. It would crawl toward me when I entered the hangar. It showed preference, recognition, intelligence that went beyond basic animal instinct. I realized I needed to modify the hangar. The space heater and pile of blankets were not enough for a growing Bigfoot that would eventually need room to move, climb, and develop naturally. I sectioned off the northwest corner of the hangar using insulated panels, created a space about 20 feet with its own heating system, ventilation, and privacy from the windows. I installed rubber matting on the floor for safety, added climbing structures made from logs and ropes, built an elevated sleeping platform, made it as close to a natural environment as I could manage inside an aircraft hangar. The infant adapted immediately, started using the climbing structures by week 8, pulled itself up onto the lowest platform by week 10. The strength development was extraordinary. What took human infants a year to accomplish, this Bigfoot infant achieved in months. Naming it happened around week 12. I had been calling it the infant or it, but that felt wrong. Too clinical, too distant. This was a living being I was caring for daily, feeding, cleaning, watching grow. It deserved a name, even if I was the only one who would ever use it. Momo responded to the name within days, would look at me when I said it, would move toward me when I called. The name stuck. By month 4, Momo was walking, not the wobbly first steps of a toddler. Confident bipedal movement, upright posture, arms used for balance but not for support. This was not an ape that sometimes walked upright. This was a being designed for bipedal locomotion. The evolutionary implications were staggering, but I was too busy managing daily care to fully process them. The growth continued at an alarming rate. Month 5, 35 pounds. Month 6, 40 pounds. Sarah brought more sophisticated measuring equipment, took x-rays using a portable machine she borrowed from her clinic under the pretense of treating large dogs. The bone structure was unique, denser than human, thicker than ape, built for strength and cold weather survival. The skeletal analysis suggested Momo would reach full size around age 10 or 12, which meant the infant stage I was managing was temporary. The juvenile stage coming next would bring entirely new challenges. Month 7 brought the first major scare. I had a delivery job I could not refuse. Critical medical supplies to a village experiencing an outbreak. 6-hour round trip. I left Momo in the secure section with extra food, water, and entertainment. I had started giving Momo simple objects to manipulate. Wooden blocks, rope to untangle, containers to open. Basic enrichment to prevent boredom. When I returned, the section was destroyed. Not violently, but thoroughly explored. Momo had figured out how to open the insulated panels, had accessed the main hangar, had climbed onto my plane, had opened the cockpit door, had pressed buttons on the instrument panel. Nothing was broken, nothing was damaged, but everything had been touched, investigated, studied. Momo was sitting in the Momo seat when I found it, looking at the controls with obvious fascination. It did not seem guilty or scared, just curious, like it had been waiting for me to come back and explain what everything was for. I reinforced the panels that night, added locks that required opposable thumbs and complex movements to open. But I also understood something important. Momo was not just growing physically, it was developing mentally at the same accelerated rate. Problem-solving, tool use, curiosity-driven exploration. This was not an animal. This was something far more cognitively advanced. Month 8 brought vocalizations that sounded almost like words. Not English words, but structured sounds with consistent patterns. Momo would make one sound repeatedly when it wanted food, a different sound when it wanted to go outside the section into the main hangar, another sound when it wanted me to stay close. Sarah recorded these vocalizations and analyzed them, found patterns that suggested proto-language, communication system more complex than any known primate except humans. Month 9, Momo started mimicking me. When I would check the plane's landing gear, Momo would crouch and look under objects in its section. When I would write in my maintenance log, Momo would scratch at the rubber floor with its finger in repeated motions. When I would eat my lunch, Momo would eat at the same time and copy my posture. This was not random imitation. This was observational learning, social bonding, the formation of a relationship that I had not intended but could no longer deny. The emotional connection was becoming undeniable. When I entered the hangar, Momo would make excited sounds. When I left, Momo would press against the barrier and watch until I was out of sight. When I worked late on aircraft maintenance, Momo would stay awake and observe quietly. It wanted to be near me, found comfort in my presence, had bonded to me in the way infant primates bond to parents. I tried to maintain distance, Tried to remember this was temporary, that eventually I would need to find Momo's family or release it into the wild where it belonged. But every day made that harder. Every feeding, every interaction, every moment of watching Momo learn and grow and develop personality. I was becoming attached in ways that complicated everything. Month 10 brought the first close call with discovery. A hangar inspector arrived unannounced. Routine safety check. Random selection. The inspector needed to verify fire suppression equipment, structural integrity, and compliance with local codes. I had 15 minutes warning from when I saw the truck pull up to when the inspector reached my door. I moved Momo into a large cargo crate in the secured section, covered it with tarps, told Momo to stay quiet using hand signals I had been teaching. Momo understood, went still, made no sound. For 90 minutes, while the inspector examined every corner of the hangar, Momo remained completely silent in that crate. The level of self-control required for an 11-month-old of any species to stay motionless and quiet for that long was extraordinary. But Momo did it, understood the danger, chose safety over comfort. When the inspector finally left, I opened the crate. Momo was calm, patient, had trusted me that hiding was necessary. That was the moment I fully understood what I had created. Not just a fed and sheltered Bigfoot, but a Bigfoot that understood humans, that trusted humans, that looked to humans for guidance and safety. I had not just saved Momo's life, I had shaped how Momo understood the world. Month 11, eating solid foods exclusively, no more formula, fruits, vegetables, nuts, occasional fish. Momo had developed preferences, loved berries, tolerated leafy greens, refused anything processed or cooked with heavy spices. The food bill was approaching $400 per month. My savings were depleting faster than I could replenish them with reduced flying income. But Momo was healthy, thriving, developing at a rate that suggested Bigfoot reached maturity much faster than humans. The challenges were only beginning. Month 12 arrived on November 7, 2017. Exactly 1 year since I found Momo freezing in my cargo hold. I measured and weighed and documented everything that morning. 48 pounds, 37 inches tall, coordinated movement, complex vocalizations, problem-solving skills equivalent to a 4 or 5-year-old human child, and a bond with me that had become the central organizing principle of Mo's life. I sat with Momo that morning and tried to imagine the next year. Momo would grow larger, stronger, harder to hide. The easy infant phase was ending. The complicated juvenile phase was beginning, and I still had no plan for what came after that. No exit strategy. No clear path to releasing Momo into the wild. No idea how to undo the domestication that was happening whether I intended it or not. But I also could not imagine my life without Momo anymore. Could not imagine walking into an empty hangar. Could not imagine not hearing those vocalizations when I arrived each morning. Could not imagine not watching Momo learn and grow and develop. I had crossed a line somewhere in that first year. Had gone from caretaker to something else. Something more complicated. Something that felt dangerously close to family. The second year would bring new challenges that I could barely imagine. Momo would grow to child size. Would need more space, more food, more stimulation. The risk of discovery would multiply. The complexity of hiding would increase. But I was committed now, had been committed the moment I picked up that freezing infant and brought it inside. I just did not know yet how much that commitment would cost me. How many relationships I would lose. How many lies I would tell. How many close calls I would survive. How completely my life would reorganize around protecting a secret that was growing larger and more difficult to hide every single day. Year 2 brought changes I had not anticipated. Momo grew at a rate that made the first year seem slow by comparison. But the infant stage was completely over. What stood before me now was a juvenile Bigfoot with energy levels that turned my hangar into an inadequate containment space. The secured section was no longer enough. Momo needed room to move, to climb, to exercise muscles that were developing with frightening strength. I started taking Momo outside at night, midnight to 3 o'clock a.m., when the world was asleep and the chances of being seen dropped to near zero. We would drive to remote locations, abandoned logging roads, frozen lakes surrounded by miles of empty forest, places where Momo could run and climb and be what it was supposed to be without walls and barriers. Those nighttime excursions became the highlight of Momo's existence. The moment I would grab my coat and keys, Momo would make excited vocalizations, would pace near the hangar door, would practically vibrate with anticipation. And when we reached the remote locations and I would open the truck door, Momo would burst out and run. Just run. For the pure joy of movement without restriction. I would watch from the truck, flashlight in hand, and see Momo move through the forest with natural grace, climbing trees in seconds, leaping between branches, moving across snow-covered ground without leaving the heavy tracks you would expect from something that size. This was not a creature meant for hangars and insulated sections. This was a being built for wilderness. And every night I took Momo back to confinement. I felt the weight of what I was doing. I was raising something wild to be tame, something free to be dependent. Challenges I was managing would multiply before they stabilized. The food requirements had become significant. 15 pounds per day. Fresh fruits and vegetables. Nuts. Occasional fish. The cost had climbed to $600 per month just for food. I had started buying in bulk from wholesale distributors, telling them I was feeding a wildlife rehabilitation facility. The lies were piling up, each one requiring me to remember details, to maintain consistency, to never slip and reveal what I was really doing. Communication had evolved beyond basic vocalizations. Momo understood English, not perfectly, but enough to respond to commands. Come here, stay there, be quiet, climb down. The comprehension was obvious. When I spoke, Momo would listen and process and respond appropriately. This was not animal training through repetition. This was language comprehension, understanding of concepts and instructions that required cognitive processing beyond any known ape. I started teaching deliberately, pointing at objects and naming them. Truck, tree, water, food. Momo would watch my mouth, would try to mimic the sounds, could not produce human speech. The vocal anatomy was wrong, but the attempt was there. The understanding that sounds carried meaning, that communication could happen through language, not just gesture. Momo also started using tools, simple ones at first, using a stick to reach objects on high shelves, using a rock to crack open tough nuts, but then more complex applications. Stacking crates to create stairs, using rope to tie objects together, manipulating latches and locks with increasing sophistication. I had to upgrade security on the hangar doors 3 times in 6 months because Momo kept figuring out how to open them. The problem-solving abilities were becoming almost unsettling. I would create puzzles, hide food in locked containers. Momo would study them, try different approaches, learn from failures, eventually succeed. The cognitive development suggested intelligence closer to human children than to any primate, which raised questions I was not equipped to answer. Evolutionarily speaking, where did they fit in the taxonomy of hominids? Were they more human than ape or more ape than human? Sarah had no answers either. She was documenting everything, but without being able to compare to other Bigfoot specimens. She was working in a vacuum. Every measurement, every observation, every developmental milestone was unprecedented. We were learning about a species in real time with a sample size of 1 and no ability to publish or share findings without revealing Momo's existence. Year 3 brought the second major close call. I had taken Momo to a remote area for a nighttime run. It was January 2019. Temperature at -38 degrees Fahrenheit. Perfect Bigfoot weather, according to everything I had read about sightings. Most reports happened in extreme cold when Bigfoot activity concentrated around limited food sources and humans stayed indoors. I had let Momo roam farther than usual, maybe a quarter mile from the truck. I could see Momo moving through the trees in the moonlight, climbing, playing, being natural. Then I saw headlights approaching on the logging road, a truck, coming slowly. Probably a hunter, checking trap lines, or looking for wolves. I flashed my lights. The signal Momo and I had established returned immediately. Momo saw the flashes and started moving back toward me. But the approaching truck had stopped. The driver had gotten out, was scanning the forest with a spotlight. And that spotlight caught Momo mid-stride, about 100 yards from my position. The hunter shouted, not words, just a sound of surprise. Then he raised a rifle. I had seconds to make a decision. I jumped out of my truck, waved my arms, shouted that everything was fine, that what he saw was my trained bear, that I had permits for wildlife rehabilitation. The lies came automatically, desperately. The hunter kept his rifle raised, kept his spotlight on Momo, who had frozen in place, smart enough to know that running would trigger pursuit. I kept talking, kept walking toward the hunter, positioned myself between his line of fire and Momo, explained I was a licensed wildlife handler, that the bear had been orphaned and raised by hand, that it was completely safe and under control. The hunter was skeptical, kept saying that did not look like any bear he had ever seen. Too tall, wrong proportions, moved wrong, but I kept insisting, kept showing false confidence, kept praying he would accept the explanation and leave. Finally, after 10 minutes of the most stressful conversation of my life, the hunter lowered his rifle, told me I should not be out here at night with a trained bear, that someone could shoot it, thinking it was a threat, climbed back in his truck and drove away. I waited until his taillights disappeared. Then I collapsed against my truck, shaking Momo, approached slowly, made soft concerned vocalizations, touched my shoulder with gentle fingers. Understood something had been wrong, that we had been in danger, that staying hidden was not just my rule, but a survival necessity. We did not go back to that location and found new places, farther from roads, deeper in wilderness that humans rarely accessed. The nighttime runs continued, but with more caution, more awareness that discovery was one chance encounter away. By age 3, in November 2019, no longer a juvenile in size, almost adult proportions, but still young in behavior and mentality. Sarah estimated Momo was equivalent to a 10 or 11-year-old human child in cognitive development, which created new challenges I had not expected. Momo was bored. The hangar enrichment was not enough. The nighttime runs were not enough. Momo needed stimulation, challenge, purpose. I tried teaching wilderness survival skills, how to identify edible plants, how to build shelter from natural materials, how to find water sources, how to track weather patterns. All the skills a wild Bigfoot would need to survive independently. Momo learned everything quickly. Could identify 24 edible plants within a month, could build a functional shelter in under an hour, could navigate by stars and landmarks. But Momo showed no interest in applying these skills. Would build the shelter, then wait for me to bring food from the truck. Would identify plants, then ask for the packaged food I had brought instead. Had learned the skills intellectually, but rejected them practically. Momo preferred human things, human food, human shelter, human companionship. The domestication I had feared was not something that might happen. It had already happened, and I had no idea how to reverse it. Sarah warned me repeatedly through those months, told me I was creating a Bigfoot that could never live in the wild, that depended on human support for survival, that had been psychologically shaped to exist in human spaces rather than natural ones. She said I had two choices, except that Momo would be dependent for life, or force a harsh transition by releasing Momo and hoping survival instinct would overcome learned dependence. Both options were terrible. Both felt like failure. I chose continued dependence. Could not imagine releasing Momo, knowing it would likely die. Could not watch something I had raised struggle and suffer because I had raised it wrong. So I kept Momo, kept providing, kept hiding, kept postponing the inevitable decision about what came next. Year 4 brought unexpected help in the form of a global catastrophe. COVID-19, the pandemic that shut down the world, lockdowns, social distancing, people staying home, businesses closing, airports emptying, and for me, less risk of discovery, fewer people around my hangar, fewer surprise visitors, Fewer excuses needed for why I was spending so much time alone at a private hangar. By March 2020, I had essentially isolated completely. Bought food in bulk once a month. Avoided social contact beyond brief, necessary interactions. Spent every day with Momo, and strangest of all, it felt normal. The rest of the world was learning to live in isolation. I had been doing it for over 3 years. Age 4. Still growing, but slower. Physical development was plateauing, but the emotional and social development was accelerating. Momo had become protective of me. Would position itself between me and any perceived threat. When a delivery driver came too close to the hangar door once, Momo made a territorial vocalization from inside that sent the driver running. I had to chase him down and explain it was my dog. Another lie. Another story to maintain. The separation anxiety had become intense. If I left the hangar for more than an hour, Momo would pace, would make distressed sounds, would press against the windows, watching for my return. When I came back, Momo would not leave my side for hours, would follow me everywhere, would sleep near my workspace instead of in the comfortable section I had built. Had decided that proximity to me was more important than comfort. I tried installing trail cameras inside the hangar to monitor Momo when I was gone. Wanted to understand the behavior, assess if distress was genuine or attention-seeking. But Momo figured out the cameras within a day, would approach them, study them, then would perform for them, waving, making faces, demonstrating tool use, showing off climbing skills. Had understood the cameras were extensions of my observation and had turned monitoring into interaction. That was when I fully understood what I had created. Momo did not think like a wild animal, did not think like a creature that should fear humans and avoid technology. Momo thought like someone who had grown up in a human environment, who understood human tools, who sought human attention, who had formed identity around being part of my world rather than part of the wild. The realization was devastating and irreversible. I had saved MMO's life in November 2016, but in doing so, I had also erased what Momo would have been naturally, had replaced wild instinct with learned dependence, had created a Bigfoot that existed between two worlds, not human enough to live in mine, not wild enough to live in its own. And the growth was continuing. Momo was getting bigger, stronger, harder to hide. The hangar that had seemed spacious in year 1 was feeling cramped by year 4. The food costs were approaching $900 per month. The time requirements were consuming entire days, and the emotional attachment I felt was making it impossible to think clearly about long-term solutions. I was no longer just hiding a Bigfoot. I was raising a dependent being that trusted me completely, that looked to me for everything, that had bonded to me in ways that mimicked family. And that bond was becoming the thing I could not escape, could not ignore, could not rationalize away. Year 5 would bring the crisis I had been avoiding, the moment when hiding would become impossible, when choices would have to be made, when the temporary solution I had maintained for years would finally collapse under the weight of reality. But I will explain that crisis in detail shortly. Right now, I need you to understand where Momo and I were at the end of year 4. We were two beings living in isolation. One human who had sacrificed normal life to protect a secret. One Bigfoot who had been shaped by that protection into something that could not exist without it. And both of us approaching a reckoning that neither of us was ready to face. Year 5 marked the end of manageable hiding. A section that had seemed adequate for a juvenile Bigfoot was now clearly insufficient for what was becoming an adult. Momo could no longer stand fully upright in most areas. Had to hunch, had to move carefully to avoid hitting the ceiling with its head. The restriction was causing behavioral changes, frustration, restlessness, long periods of pacing that wore patterns into the rubber floor matting. I expanded the section again, removed more barriers, gave Momo access to 2/3 of the entire hangar. My workspace shrank to a narrow corner. The plane had to be moved outside permanently, covered with tarps, exposed to weather. But keeping Momo comfortable and hidden was now the priority. Flying jobs had become secondary. My entire existence had reorganized around maintaining secrecy for a being that was becoming physically impossible to conceal. The food requirements had reached crisis levels, 35 pounds per day. Every day, without exception, MAO's metabolism demanded constant fuel to support the massive frame and energy expenditure. I was spending $800 per month on food, more than my rent, more than my utilities, more than everything else combined. My savings were gone. I had taken loans, maxed credit cards, stopped contributing to retirement accounts. The financial strain was becoming unsustainable, but I could not reduce Momo's food without causing health problems. The nighttime excursions had become more complicated as well. Momo no longer fit comfortably in my truck, had to crouch in the cargo bed under heavy tarps. And finding truly isolated locations was harder than it had been years earlier. More people had moved to Alaska during COVID. More remote workers seeking space. More cabins in areas that used to be empty. Every trip carried increased risk of being seen by someone with a camera phone and internet access. In June 2021, a delivery driver arrived at my hangar during daylight. I had ordered supplies online, forgotten to specify the delivery time. The driver knocked. I opened the door 6 inches, kept my body blocking the view inside. But Momo was curious, moved toward the sound. The driver saw the shadow through the gap, large, tall, moving, asked what kind of dog I had. I said Mastiff mix. He said that must be one huge Mastiff. I agreed and took the packages quickly, closed the door, heard the driver's footsteps pause, heard him walk around the hangar exterior, checking windows, trying to see inside. I had covered the windows years ago, but some gaps remained. After 10 minutes, he left. I never ordered delivery to the hangar again. My growth was slowing, but not stopping. Accidental injury happened in February 2023. Momo was playing. That is the only word that fits. Playing like a child would play. Chasing, roughhousing. Forgot its own strength, the way young beings often do. Pushed me playfully. Just a shove, but 300 pounds of force behind it. I flew backward, hit the workbench, felt ribs crack. The pain was immediate and intense. Momo froze, made distressed vocalizations, approached slowly with hands extended, touched my chest gently where I was holding the injury, understood something was wrong, that the play had caused harm. The guilt was written across Momo's face, ears back, eyes wide, posture shrinking, making apologetic sounds I had never heard before. I managed to stand, managed to breathe through the pain, managed to signal that I was okay even though I was not okay. 2 broken ribs, later confirmed by X-ray, after I drove myself to the emergency room with a story about falling off a ladder. The healing took 6 weeks. The pain lasted longer. But what struck me most was Momo's response. For 3 weeks after the injury, Momo would not come near me, would not touch me, would stay on the opposite side of the hangar, would bring me food and water, but would not make physical contact, had understood cause and effect, had understood that its strength could hurt me, had chosen distance over risk of further harm. I had to coax Momo back slowly, had to demonstrate that I was healed, had to initiate contact first, show that I was not afraid, that accidents happen, that our bond was not broken by injury. It took a month before Momo would interact normally again. And even then, Momo was more careful, more aware, had learned a painful lesson about the difference between our physical capabilities. That incident crystallized something I had been avoiding. Momo was not dangerous by nature, but Momo was dangerous by size and strength. One accident could cause serious harm. One moment of forgetting could result in catastrophic injury. And as Momo continued growing, the risk would only increase. I was living with a being that could kill me accidentally, and that being cared about me enough to be devastated by the possibility. My social life had collapsed entirely by this point. I had no friends anymore, no relationships beyond professional interactions. Anyone who had tried to get close had eventually been pushed away by my secrecy, my constant excuses for why I could not meet up or attend events or maintain normal social patterns. My brother had stopped calling. My cousin had stopped inviting me to family gatherings. The few friends I had kept in contact with had drifted away after years of me declining invitations. I was isolated completely, by choice and necessity. The only consistent relationship in my life was with a Bigfoot that could not exist in the world beyond my hangar. By age 7, in November 2023, my vocalizations had gotten louder, deeper, more resonant. Sound carried farther than it had when Momo was smaller. And my nearest neighbor, a half-mile away, had started complaining, said they heard strange sounds at night, asked if I had large dogs, if I was aware of howling coming from my property, if maybe I should do something about the noise. I apologized, said I would look into it. Bought sound dampening panels and installed them throughout the hangar. Made Momo practice being quiet. Rewarded silence. Discouraged vocalizations during evening hours when sound traveled farthest. Momo tried, really tried, but suppressing natural communication was difficult. Sometimes vocalizations happened involuntarily. Excitement, stress, dreams. Momo would make sounds while sleeping that I could not prevent or control. The police welfare check happened in March 2024. Someone had called. Anonymous report. Suspicious activity. Strange sounds. Possible animal hoarding situation. 2 officers arrived mid-morning, said they needed to inspect the property, make sure everything was safe and legal. I could not refuse without raising more suspicion. I had 15 minutes of conversation at the door while I stalled. Told them I worked strange hours, that I sometimes played nature documentaries at high volume, that I was a private person who valued solitude. The officers were polite but insistent. They needed to see inside. Protocol Momo was in the main hangar. I had no time to secure it in the section. No way to hide something 7.5 feet tall and 320 pounds. My only option was the truck. I excused myself. Said I needed to move some equipment before they entered. Went inside. Signaled to Momo. Emergency protocol we had practiced. Hide in the truck bed under the heavy tarp. Stay completely still. Make no sound. Momo moved fast. Understood the urgency. Climbed into the truck bed silently. Pulled the tarp over itself. Arranged it to look like covered equipment. Became completely motionless. I led the officers inside. They walked through the entire hangar. Looked at my tools. My workspace. The insulated section that I explained was for temperature-sensitive equipment storage. They asked about the truck. I said it was packed for a supply run. Offered to unpack it. They declined. Said everything looked fine. Apologized for the intrusion. Left. I waited 30 minutes after they drove away before letting Momo out. The level of self-control required for Momo to stay hidden under that tarp while strangers walked around the property was extraordinary. Any movement, any sound, any sign of breathing that shifted the tarp would have meant discovery. But Momo had maintained perfect stillness, had trusted me that hiding was necessary, had chosen safety over comfort or curiosity. That close call shook me more than the others. I had been lucky, incredibly lucky, but luck runs out. Eventually, someone would see something I could not explain. Eventually, the excuses would not be enough. Eventually, the truth would emerge, whether I was ready or not. By age 8, in November 2024, nearly full adult size. The growth was almost complete. But the crisis was just beginning. My hangar lease was up for renewal in December. The landlord required an insurance inspection before signing a new lease. An inspector would need full access, would need to photograph everything, document all structures, verify safety compliance. There was no way to hide Momo during that kind of thorough examination. I had 3 options: find a new location and somehow move Momo without being seen, release Momo into the wild and hope survival instinct overcame learned dependence, or refuse the inspection and lose the hangar, which would mean losing the only space where Momo could exist. Then something unexpected happened. A Bigfoot sighting, 50 miles north of my location. Multiple witnesses. Hunters reported seeing an adult Bigfoot near a frozen lake, 8 feet tall, dark brown fur, moving through trees with unusual speed. The sighting was all over local news. Wildlife officials dismissed it as misidentified bear. But I knew better. I had been raising a Bigfoot for 8 years. I knew what they looked like, how they moved. The description was accurate. There were others out there. A population, maybe even a family group, and they were not that far away. 50 miles was nothing for a being that could move through wilderness as efficiently as Momo could. The question was whether Momo could find them, whether they would accept Momo, whether a Bigfoot raised by humans could integrate into wild Bigfoot society. Sarah thought it was worth trying, said releasing Momo near the sighting location gave the best chance of survival. That wild Bigfoot might recognize Momo as one of their own despite the domestication. That instinct might bridge the gap that learned behavior had created. But she also admitted it was a gamble. That Momo might be rejected, might struggle to find food without human assistance, might return to areas near humans seeking help and end up captured or killed. I had 2 weeks to decide. 2 weeks before the insurance inspection. 2 weeks before everything I had built over 8 years elapsed. 2 weeks to choose between keeping Momo and losing the hangar, or releasing Momo and hoping the wild would provide what I no longer could. The weight of that decision was crushing. I had saved Momo's life 8 years ago, had raised Momo through infancy and childhood and adolescence, had formed a bond that felt like family, and now I had to choose whether to end that bond, whether to send Momo away, whether to hope that love was enough to survive what came next. Every time I looked at Momo, I saw the infant I had found freezing in my cargo hold, saw the progression from helpless baby to intelligent juvenile to near adult being with personality and preferences and emotions, saw 8 years of shared existence, of learning and growing and adapting together, of creating something unique that the world would never understand or accept. The decision I was facing was not just about logistics or safety or legality. It was about acknowledging that I had created a situation with no good outcome, that saving Momo's life had set in motion events that could only end in separation or discovery, that my choice 8 years ago had led inevitably to this impossible moment. I had 2 weeks, 14 days, to figure out what love meant when keeping meant destroying and releasing meant abandoning, to decide whether I had the courage to do what was right instead of what was easy, to choose between my need for Momo and Momo's need for freedom. The clock was running, the inspection was scheduled, and I still had no idea what I was going to do. The decision came on November 7th, 2024, exactly 8 years since I found Momo freezing in my cargo hold. The symmetry felt intentional, like the universe was drawing a circle, beginning and ending on the same date. I loaded supplies into my truck, food, water, emergency gear, everything Momo might need during the transition I was about to force, and I drove north toward the coordinates where wild Bigfoot had been sighted 2 weeks earlier. Momo sensed something was different, made questioning vocalizations during the drive, looked at me with concern. We had done nighttime excursions hundreds of times, but this felt different. The time of day was wrong. My emotional state was wrong. Momo could read me well enough after 8 years to know this was not routine. We reached a frozen lake around 2 p.m. temperature at minus 39 degrees Fahrenheit. The exact conditions most Bigfoot sightings reported. I parked at the southern edge, opened the door for Momo, watched as Momo climbed out and immediately scanned the surroundings, alert, interested. This was new territory, unexplored, and Momo's natural curiosity kicked in despite the unusual circumstances. I started walking north toward the tree line. Momo followed. We had walked together countless times, but this walk felt heavier. Each step took us farther from the truck, farther from safety, closer to whatever came next. I was leading Momo toward an uncertain future while every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to take Momo home, to find another solution that did not involve separation. We reached a clearing about a quarter mile from the lake. I stopped, sat on a fallen log. Momo sat beside me. We stayed like that for maybe 20 minutes, not moving, Not communicating, just being together one last time in the way we had been for 8 years. Human and Bigfoot, caretaker and dependent, father and something like son. Then I heard movement in the trees to our north, heavy footsteps, deliberate. Something large was approaching. Momo heard it too. Stood up, made a low vocalization, not alarmed, curious. I stood as well. Positioned myself slightly in front of Momo, out of protective instinct, even though Momo was larger and stronger than me. A figure emerged from the forest, 8 feet tall, massive shoulders, dark brown fur, an adult Bigfoot, male, based on size and build. It stopped 50 yards away, stood completely still, watching us, assessing Momo. Made a sound I had never heard before. Not the vocalizations I was familiar with from 8 years of communication. Something different, deeper, more complex. A sound that carried meaning I could not interpret. The wild Bigfoot responded, made a similar sound, different pattern, but same general structure. They were communicating, speaking a language I had never taught Momo, a language that had been dormant, waiting for the right context to emerge. The wild Bigfoot took 3 steps closer, stopped again, made another vocalization. Momo responded. The exchange continued for maybe 2 minutes. Then the wild Bigfoot gestured, a deliberate motion with one hand. Come here. The meaning was clear even without words. Momo looked at me, torn. The wild Bigfoot was offering something. Family, maybe. Belonging. A place in the natural world that Momo had never known. But I was safety. Security. 8 years of care and protection and love. Momo was being forced to choose between 2 worlds. And I could see the conflict written across Momo's face. I did what I should have done years earlier. I stepped back. Created physical distance between myself and Momo. Removed the option of staying close to me. Forced a decision by making one choice impossible. Momo made a distressed sound. Took a step toward me. I shook my head. Held up my hand. Stop. Stay there. The wild Bigfoot vocalized again, more insistent. Momo turned, looked at the wild Bigfoot, then looked back at me. The internal struggle was visible. 8 years of bonding versus biological imperative. Learned dependence versus natural belonging. Human world versus wild world. Momo made a choice. Took 1 step toward the wild Bigfoot, then another, then stopped, turned back 1 more time, and did something that broke my heart. Momo raised 1 hand, waved. The gesture I had taught years ago through repetition and reward. The human gesture that Momo had learned meant goodbye or acknowledgement or connection. Momo was using human communication 1 last time before walking away from the human who had raised it. I waved back, could not speak, could not trust my voice. Just stood there waving at a Bigfoot I had saved and raised and loved and was now losing. Momo held the wave for several seconds, then turned and walked toward the wild Bigfoot. No hesitation now. Decision made. The 2 Bigfoots stood together for a moment. The wild one was taller, broader, everything Momo would eventually become. They communicated briefly. Then the wild Bigfoot turned and walked into the forest. Momo followed. I watched them disappear into the trees. Watched Momo leave my life as abruptly as Momo had entered it 8 years earlier. 1 moment there. Next moment, gone. I stayed in that clearing for an hour. Could not make myself leave. Could not accept that 8 years had just ended. That the being I had organized my entire life around was gone. That the hangar would be empty. That my purpose for the last 8 years had just walked away into the wilderness. Eventually, I walked back to my truck, drove home in silence. The emptiness was overwhelming. The hangar felt wrong without Momo. Too quiet, too still, too empty. I had gotten used to vocalizations, to movement, to presence. Now, there was nothing. Just space and equipment and absence. 3 days later, I installed a trail camera at the release site. Could not let go completely. Needed to know if Momo was surviving, if the wild Bigfoot had accepted Momo into whatever social structure existed, if my decision had been right or if I had sent Momo to slow death through starvation or rejection. I checked the camera 1 week later. Found 47 images. Momo was there, with 4 other Bigfoot. Different sizes, different ages, a family group. Momo was smaller than the adults, but not the smallest. Was learning, watching, mimicking their foraging behavior. Eating foods I had never provided. Moving through the forest with increasing confidence. One image showed Momo looking directly at the camera. Recognition in those eyes. Understanding that I was watching, that I still cared. That separation did not mean abandonment. And in that image, Momo looked different. Not happy exactly, but right. Like a being that was finally in the correct environment, finally living the way it was meant to live. I removed the camera that day, did not go back. Momo was adapting, integrating, becoming what I had prevented it from being for 8 years. My continued surveillance would only reinforce dependence, would only delay full integration into wild Bigfoot society. I had to let go completely, for Momo's sake. But Momo's story raised questions I could not ignore anymore. How many other Bigfoot infants die in the wilderness because their species has been forced into hiding? How many medical emergencies go untreated because Bigfoot cannot risk contact with humans? How many births fail? How many injuries become fatal? How many preventable deaths happen because we pretend Bigfoot does not exist? One saved one Bigfoot infant, fed it, raised it, protected it, gave it 8 years of life it would not have had otherwise. But I also domesticated it, stole its wild childhood, created dependency that took months to undo. I did everything wrong and everything right simultaneously. And that complexity is exactly why the world needs to know the truth. Bigfoot is real. They live in Alaska and across North America. They are intelligent. They are social. They are struggling to survive in shrinking wilderness while humans pretend they do not exist. And that pretense is killing them. Slowly, quietly, one preventable death at a time. I am going public with this story because Momo deserves better than secrecy. Because the species Momo belongs to deserves recognition, legal protection, habitat preservation, medical intervention when needed. The same considerations we give to endangered species that we acknowledge exist. If you find a Bigfoot infant, do not do what I did. Do not raise it human. Do not teach it dependence. Find its family. Return it to the wild where it belongs. But also understand that Bigfoot infants are dying out there because their species has no support system, no protection, no acknowledgement of existence. This video is my confession, my advocacy, my attempt to force a conversation the world has been avoiding. Bigfoot exists. I raised one for 8 years, and now I am telling everyone so that maybe, somehow, Momo's species can survive what humans have done to their world. The choice is yours now. Believe or dismiss, advocate or ignore, protect or destroy. But you cannot claim ignorance anymore. You know Bigfoot is real. You know they are endangered. You know they need help. What you do with that knowledge will determine whether Momo species survives the next generation or becomes another extinction that humanity caused by refusing to acknowledge what was always there, hiding in the wilderness, raising their young, struggling to survive, hoping humans would finally see them as something worth protecting instead of something world denies.